Hello, and welcome to the Health Go Live webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at ServiceNow. We would like to remind you that the Q&A feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions for the panel throughout the discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Todd Fisher, who joins us from ServiceNow.
Good afternoon. Welcome again, and thank you, Health, for showcasing this important topic. My name is Todd. I'm the head of healthcare providers for the Americas at ServiceNow, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion. As mentioned, please drop any questions in the Q&A section for comments, and we'll be sure to leave about 5 minutes at the end for those answers. Today's topic, driving healthcare innovation through stakeholder buy-in. Joining me on the panel will be Vishaka Sant, Health and Life Sciences Product Management with ServiceNow, Brian Lohr, Vice President from Contender Solutions, an elite ServiceNow partner, and Michael McLeroy, Senior Vice President, Head of IT for the U.S. for GenesisCare. Each panelist will share practical insights and actionable steps to help you become a better catalyst for change and innovation within your organizations. To set the stage a bit for the audience and for the panel, we live in an innovation-rich era where innovation is critical for healthcare organizations to improve patient outcomes, increase operational efficiencies, lower cost, and stay competitive in an ever-changing landscape. With an abundance of opportunity and us being a change leader in healthcare and driving innovation can be a challenging task, particularly when it comes to getting buy-in by stakeholders across an organization. In this webinar, we'll explore strategies and best practices to gain stakeholder adoption, buy-in, and drive innovation. To get us started, let's do some brief introductions, starting with Vishaka Sant, and we'll go to Brian and Mike. Goal here is tell us a little bit about yourself, background, and why this is so pertinent and where we are at in the national healthcare journey and conversation. Vishaka.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks, Health, for having us on. So a little bit of background on me. My name is Vishaka Sant. As Todd mentioned, I lead the healthcare, life sciences, and payer product management here at ServiceNow. I have more than 20 years of experience, more recently with Kaiser Permanente for 11 years. And I've dedicated my life to really at this intersection of experiences and technology and delivering a holistic digital strategy for healthcare organizations that look at enabling better patient care, clinician experiences, and then a focus on strategic planning, market growth, with an overall wrapper of improving patient outcomes. Thanks for having me.
I think I'm next, and Vishaka, that was kind of hard to follow, but my name is Brian Lohr. I'm the VP of Sales at Contender Solutions. I've been blessed with a professional journey of close to 25 years in healthcare, primarily in oncology, and then also in a digital health solution for pediatric vision. Basically, leading a team of solutions anywhere from large CapEx to SaaS to professional managed services. And what excites me is being as part of this ServiceNow ecosystem as an elite partner with Contender is that innovation is at the heart of everything we do. And instead of just being focused on point of care or point solutions across the health system or in different specialties, being part of a platform that serves as a connective tissue across all these point solutions and being able to solve larger problems. So thanks for having me.
Michael.
My name is Mike McLeroy. I am the head of IT for GenesisCare in the U.S. I have over 20 years of healthcare technology experience, working predominantly with provider organizations and large national healthcare management companies. Over the last 5 to 10 years, I've been in senior leadership roles focused on IT strategy, IT architecture, and involved in the executive leadership teams. I spend a lot of my day working with my peers on the ELT, convincing them of the need to advance the technology to drive our business forward. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thank you to you all. Vishaka, the first question I'll send your way. In your Kaiser, given the size of Kaiser and the many stakeholders you had to deal with, as you reflect back on your success there, Are there any particular tactics that helped you drive innovation and be successful? I think you're on mute, Vishak.
I would say that there's a quote that I read the other day that actually came and summarized this in a nutshell. It's by Peter Drucker. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And if you think about what that means for healthcare organizations like the size of Kaiser or any of the other ones that are across the globe that we work with today, the main notion of this is one, embracing a culture of innovation, right? So it's that kind of connective thread that helps foster an environment where employees feel like they're actually empowered to think creatively about the solutions that they might be facing at the front lines. Recognizing and rewarding innovative ideas, or when people speak up about when things are wrong, oftentimes they feel like, that's looked down upon, or now they're going to get stuck with having to find the solution. And that doesn't really embrace this notion of cultural innovation and really getting to a point where, two, you're establishing things like innovation labs and teams and dedicated resources that are focused on actually driving the move forward. There were innovation labs and centers where we tested out proof of concepts. We failed rather quickly, but then we moved forward and we learned from those things. The third thing is fostering external partnerships and collaborations. There is not one healthcare organization today that is going to be able to make it on their own unless they actually strike up these strategic partnerships, because it brings fresh perspectives, it brings expertise and resources to drive the actual innovation and change. Here at ServiceNow, we really offer the ability for a platform to come around looking at things like, supporting customer-facing perspectives. And then now when you look at things like industry-specific use cases, whether it's life sciences or healthcare or the payer side, looking at how we can actually have workflow optimization to improve our processes for employees who are facing a lot of pressures right now. Or looking at things in the IT back office, right? About 35% of administrative overhead is just tasks that could be pushed to things like RPA and technology like hyperautomation. And so really looking at the long tail of your business operations and trying to figure out, like, where do you digitize something and where do you innovate something, and being able to differentiate between the two, I think it's really important for us to think about as healthcare leaders in our space.
That's very good. So Brian, I guess let's pitch some of that back over to you. I think what we heard is innovation really takes the entire organization, stakeholdership across, top to bottom, bottom to top. Given how the executive personas are changing and some of the financial constraints that obviously we've seen in a post-COVID era, what are some things that you can add? What have you seen in an industry to help gain that adoption?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I mean, digital transformation investment in the last 3 years has basically gone the pace of something you normally see take 10 years, right? To the epidemic and so forth. And the days of really just kind of positioning a solution with one senior level champion in healthcare and then having them muscle that through the finish line are definitely a thing of the past. And what we're finding is any investments, if the financial pressures on today's health systems, that they clearly demonstrate, you have to clearly be able to demonstrate and measure how it's going to improve clinician and patient experiences, the health system financial stability, and the outcomes. And as a result of that, and the different customers we're working for, they have a large committee, right? And you have to be able to map out all the different stakeholders, whether they're influencers, seekers, amplifying a solution. And we have to do a better job of speaking with our ears, really just do a deep discovery outside of just IT, but across the organization of, Vishaka mentioned, developing different workflows that have an impact that improves patient care. That's things such as taking this large administrative burden that we see with all our caregivers today in their relationships with their EHRs, which I think I read a stat a couple of weeks ago that's an estimated $1 trillion cost to our US health system, and being able to provide automation in the right spots to return that time back to our caregivers to be focused on that of the patient and delivering better patient and physician experiences. So you need to work with a committee of numerous stakeholders that carry on different responsibilities and be able to educate and socialize on how a platform like ServiceNow has the flexibility and with innovation at its core to solve different problems that impact numerous parts of the enterprise.
So Michael, let's take it to you, obviously, on a very personal note. Obviously, you're a provider, you're from industry as an executive and member of the C-suite. I think we've seen the entire C-suite get much closer aligned in their individual roles in digital transformation and innovation, and how it's obviously going to impact many different areas of the business, not just the traditional area of IT. How have you seen your role change over the past 20 years, and what's required to tell the right story to ensure that your peers on the left and right and your ELT executive leadership team, whether it's the CFO or the chief operating officer or the chief clinical officer, how have you had to adapt your vision to bring those stakeholders along?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. We've gone from years ago where the CIO was making all of the decisions based on technology and the technology needs for an organization, and we've become much more strategic business partners with the rest of ELT. So we're more focused on having quality conversations around what are the challenges and opportunities for the business and our clinicians, our frontline workers. How can we use the technology and digital transformation to solve some of those problems, and getting the buy-in from those individuals. So it's not just an IT top-down decision. Brian's absolutely right. We all have to come together as stakeholders to drive that decision-making process. One of the ways I do that, I spend a lot of time outside of our corporate office. I spend a lot of time in our clinics, our facilities, talking to our clinicians, talking to our frontline workers, getting an understanding of what the challenges on the ground are. And by doing that, I can get a better sense of how we can leverage digital transformation, AI, and other new technology to improve quality work that they're doing, reduce the amount of steps. We talk about RPA, we talk about everything else, but until we understand where we can implement that, and then take those challenges back to the ELT and say, here are the top 3 opportunities we have within the business to solve some problems.
Yeah, that resonates personally with me. Obviously, I'm a big agile thought leader. Obviously, lean, transformation. I think the principles behind a lot of that you speak to around what we call go to the gimbal, right? Go to where the work's happening. So that way you can see the innovation or opportunities for innovation firsthand.
Right.
I think, Brian, that takes me to my next question, which is back to you. Is obviously lead partner. You've seen expectations change, and by that I mean not just for the initial innovation adoption. I think innovation adoption starts obviously with the overall buy-in, what we'll call sourcing of a technology or innovation, but it goes well into the implementation, right, and the support phase. I'd be interested in how you see the need to ensure that adoption that starts at the beginning to get ELT buy-in for sourcing the idea. How have you seen that continue all the way through implementation and so on in an organization as a frontline partner for ServiceNow?
Sure, Todd. And Mike, I love your comment on how you're out in the field, right? So the problems that you're trying to solve aren't just coming from the boardroom or from corporate, but they're problems that you've seen or touched, and impacted being in a clinic. So if for instance, Mike and I were sitting down as a partner and customer and really kind of just whiteboarding what are those pain points and getting a better understanding of what current state looks like, because we're having these conversations because we want to move to a future state, but what is current state? And then us developing a roadmap of the steps, 1, 2, 3 to get to that future state. And then setting the right expectations with the entire team, because it is a team we're working with. It's going to have a representation from the various stakeholders, but setting right expectations and then socializing that roadmap along the way. And then most importantly is have to have discipline and governance. Without discipline and governance and a team that's combined between us as the partner and the end customer, then things are going to run into speed bumps or, could have scope creep or so forth. So having that discipline, focus, governance with the customer team, and then constantly having report backs to that of the strategic roadmap and the plan I found is the way that we kind of take that euphoric moment of day one and extend it all the way through the plan.
Brian, do you believe that obviously not that one is necessarily more important than the other, but I guess in my personal experience, and I think we'll come to this in some future questions here in a minute, is it more important to get the wave of enthusiasm in the beginning, or is it more important after you source it and everyone's excited and the hard work starts? What's more important, and where should you exert more energy, if that's fair?
I think you have different moments of emotional highs with different stakeholders along the way, right? So if we think at the very beginning, that's who's actually endorsing this investment solution, from a funding standpoint, and basically putting their name on the line that this is our solution path for the identified problems. And then as you get into it and you're in the first couple of steps, I find that you constantly along the way, as the stakeholder team sometimes expands and new members come in, as we're going wider and deeper across the enterprise, is you always have to pause and explain the why. Why are we doing this, and how is this going to impact you? And with the eye always being on improving caregivers or patients' experience, or both, right? And not losing sight of that, because as long as we don't lose sight and they understand the why, I feel that governance and discipline is much easier, because they're all wanting to get to that end state as well. So I don't know if there's one area to spend. I just find you just better bring the energy every single day to keep it.
No, that's very good feedback. And I think before we go to you, Vishaka, I think being an agile practitioner, one of the things leading teams, I always gauge what's called a happy factor. Might sound a little bit silly, but when you ask somebody how enthusiastic and happy they are from a project perspective, from ideation through implementation, what you'll find is if you ask that same question across the sourcing through implementation and sustaining, you'll see everyone's happy factor go up and down. It'll go high, everyone's great. Hard work happens, it'll go down. I think it's important to make sure that you always keep your finger on the pulse of everybody in the organization, not just if it's software development or if it's executive leadership buy-in, to gauge where everyone's at in that wave, and to expect ups and downs throughout the process. Awesome. So Vishaka, I think near and dear to ServiceNow, obviously from a platform perspective, we have a lot of capabilities. ServiceNow has a lot of capabilities, and that problem is not just simply unique to ServiceNow. I think you can fill in the blank with a few other platforms that are out there. I think sometimes the hardest question to answer or to ask and then subsequently answer with the right buy-in is, where do you start? Right? How do you find the right place to start to maximize value?
Yeah, I think to what Brian was saying, here's some strategies that I would really consider. One is, understanding the customer needs and the pain points. So Brian was talking about, you have some influx of people that are coming in through the ELT or different stakeholders that are decision makers. You need to understand, one, who has the influence, and two, who has the power, and three, who has a voice but not a vote. Right. And once you understand those three things, I think you're much better positioned to really understand where do you need to start, because you then get to identify the key pain points, because you have some sort of a target customer. And for that target customer, you have to get into this dialogue about not just the return on investment, but you have to think about the value of investment. There's a question in chat about this notion of pilotitis, right? That's what we call it at Kaiser. It's like death by pilot. Some of them were very successful, but at the same time, they never actually expanded because either the partner couldn't scale or funding wasn't available. I think as you think about long-term strategic growth and you go in to test some of these concepts and the technologies, you also have to do an analysis of what are your key drivers for success? And when you hit that success, is there going to be a tranche of money that's going to be available for you to actually scale? Because that will help determine, is this a priority or is it just a nice to have and a proof of technology that perhaps we can kick that can further down the road and get to it when we do. I think the other part of this is really making sure that you understand customer segmentation, right? And what I mean by that is we all hear about like, oh, there's burnout, right? Yeah, there's 17% fewer workers per person right now in healthcare. But this is not just a supply problem, it's a demand problem. 46% of patients are 60 to 90 years older. There's 46% more people in the actual demanding healthcare arena. And so you have to kind of understand when we're talking about patient experiences, provider experiences, there's two sides to that coin, and that segmentation of that customer, because they're both customers of ours, is how are you making that experience better? And the other part of it is understanding the decision-making process. If you have an investment that you want to do that's up to a certain dollar amount, it goes through a certain level. If it's a higher dollar amount, perhaps it goes to the board. And if you're not doing that, an understanding of decision-making and the meeting before the meeting in order to get the approval, and therefore the actual decision-making meeting is just to check the box, then you haven't actually set yourself up for success. And that's what we oftentimes end up doing is we're not having those series of meetings prior to, and it's painful. And that happy factor you're talking about, Todd, that is something that comes about all the time when you're in these like long drawn out implementations and your labor force is down and then you're up, but like being able to keep a pulse on that decision-making and where you're at in actually that whole process it's going to be extremely important. And the last thing I just want to add to that is it's not just technologists. Clinicians are your biggest advocates. If you have clinicians leading the charge and championing these investments, your rate for success is so much more higher than if it's just a technologist who's coming there with, oh, there's another bright, shiny object that we want to do. No, but if a clinician is saying, hey, this is going to help me reduce, the overall spend for congestive heart failure because we have XYZ measures on it, that speaks volumes. So that partnership between the technologist and the clinician to actually make things a strategic move for the organization is paramount.
Yeah, so that very valuable. I think you mentioned. I think if you think you're presenting to the vice president or even the chief operating officer, I think one of the things I've always done is be wise and assume that somebody else is going to sit in the meeting that I didn't foresee or wasn't originally there, and make sure that there's conversation and question answers that might gear towards the CFO or vice versa, right? I know now that nowadays the C-suite is getting closer together. And so there's much more of a consortium around making obviously significant financial decisions around innovation, which Mike, that brings me to back to you. I think what we often hear is there's no budget. That however is commonly contradicts the company or a healthcare organization's need and desire to innovate, right? Those are a direct confliction right now, given where new technologies are going around AI, not just the historical AI, but generative AI, RPA, virtual assistants. How do you balance the two between one, we need to cut cost, but two, we need to invest, knowing that some of that investment, it'll take a little bit of time to realize the cost efficiencies that are gained from some of those technologies.
That's right. There's never a budget, right? We never have money to spend. And we're always being asked to do more with less. But it goes back to Vishaka's point about the death by pilot, right? If we can make a valuable business case and bring in our clinical partners and other partners in the organization to help build the case, what are we trying to accomplish with new technology? Let's put the budget aside for a second. Let's not even think about cost, right? We've identified the problem. We've identified what we're trying to solve. Now let's work as a team with our clinical partners, our business partners, and build a business case of how are we going to solve this? What's the right technological approach to solve it? Is it RPA? Let's assume it's RPA. But now part of that business case is we're going to define outcomes, and we're going to define how we're going to measure those outcomes to make this, or to prove the success of the pilot, quote unquote, proof of concept, whatever we want to call it. Then we take that to, the leadership team who's in charge of funding it, and we'll say, okay, look, if we go all in with RPA, it's going to cost us $1 million. But let's focus on this one use case scenario. We've got predefined outcomes we're trying to achieve. It's going to cost us a fraction of $1 million. And if we're successful in this, we're going to improve, we're going to reduce the amount of time spent in a patient's chart clicking around, or a clinician is going to save an extra 10 minutes per case because they're not having to input as much data anymore. And we're going to, if we can define the success, and we can be successful with that proof of concept, taking the dollars that we save with time and reducing the clicks will help justify the additional expense, if that makes sense. So I've never approached it from, I have this much money to spend. I want to justify the reason that we need to proceed with this, and then back in the dollars through that business case.
Yeah, I think you said it. I think there's value in making sure that, and if you go way back, we've called them balanced scorecards. We obviously performance dashboards. I think a lot of the technologies and platforms now are building in AI, generative AI, and true analytics to pull all of those performance dashboards, and then tie them to corporate KPIs. Every corporation they have 3, 4, 5, maybe more. Could be tied to engagement, employee engagement, could be tied to corporate overall growth, could be tied to top line revenue or bottom line costs. Whatever those are, I think we've moved meaningfully closer to making sure that everything we do from an innovation perspective is tied to those benchmarks and key performance indicators. Vishaka, I'm going to jump back over to you. You started to go into a little bit of depth when you mentioned getting stakeholder adoption on the clinical side. Really speaks to horizontal culture of innovation. And I guess I'd like to pick at that a little bit more in your perspective, because you see so many small, medium and large healthcare organizations that sometimes may be still a bit more siloed. How important, so first question, how important is a culture of horizontal innovation? And then what are you seeing out there in organizations' evolution to be a little less siloed in that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you create a vertical of innovation, you've essentially created a silo, right? And that's why healthcare is so fragmented still, is because we have these silos of information and processes and people that really do want to go horizontal, but our systems have been set up, and the investments that our healthcare organizations have made have been set up to where, they're not necessarily going to go and rip and replace, right? So I think this notion of horizontal culture of innovation can only be enabled if you have a platform that allows that sharing of information from the verticals so that you can actually have new value created across the horizontal. And I think it takes a few different shapes and forms. One is looking at it from the standpoint of leadership support, right? Good leaders set the tone of creating an innovative and friendly culture. It sends a powerful message through the organization. The resources, the recognition, some of the things I captured previously all come to the forefront. The other aspect of this is if you want to truly innovate, you need to think outside the industry. We looked at and compared ourselves to industries like, banking, like automotive. We looked at the consumer experience from Disney. We compared our consumer experience for products to things like Home Depot. And we said, why are those organizations so successful at what they're doing? And what can we do in healthcare that allows us to actually push the needle and become more innovative? I think to the point that Mike was also making in terms of, getting the continuous buy-in, some of the key things that you also have to think about are there's hard benefits and there's soft benefits. Soft benefits like patient satisfaction, end user experience, right? Then you have those hard benefits of I am taking costs out of the system. I'm giving 10 minutes back per employee across, 100,000 employees. Then you actually get to somebody's cost center, and then you actually get to a point of being able to make this a very real strategic conversation. There's plenty of priorities out there. I think the notion of a horizontal innovation culture also stems from this sense of communication and recognition, right? Sharing success stories of innovation projects so that you can actually get to a point of getting the organization behind it. We used to call it the snowball effect, right? That one kind of iterative innovation that just keeps percolating, and then all of a sudden you've gained this momentum, and now you've actually created a huge value generator for the organization. And so I think by embracing this horizontal culture, looking at leadership support, looking at this notion of a platform that allows you to take those vertical silos and actually create it in a way that allows you to integrate and create new value. And then having the ability to actually foster that collaboration and drive some of that innovative culture through leaders that actually champion it is also essential for us to be successful at these organizations.
So Mike, going back to you for a little bit, I think to follow that thread, I mentioned it in Vishaka around the happy factor. I think closely related to that is the concept of enterprise stamina and an organization's ability to stay with it with the same excitement and fervor that they started a project with. And I think when you take today's work environment, we're much more challenged because we have at-home employees, we have on-premise employees, and balancing that, we probably have higher rates of turnover throughout healthcare, especially on the clinical side. And so my question to you, Mike, is how do you make sure that your problems are still everyone's problems? If that's like it, how do you make sure your problems and what you're trying to pull off from an innovation perspective remain front and center to the entire organization?
Yeah. If we've truly been successful in getting that partnership buy-in, those become our problems, and everybody should be equally invested in seeing those through. In my experience, there's nothing that drives a project forward than a clinician who's bought in to a project, right? They have the tenacity to pull everybody along. But I think at the end of the day, it's if we're all aligned and we've all committed that what we are trying to solve are the challenges that the business is facing, and whether it's clinical or corporate, IT, whatever it is, if we're all aligned and we are all in agreement that solving those challenges are our priorities, then those problems remain ours, and we are all bought into seeing that through to success.
Yeah, so I think stamina really equates to making sure you say something, you say it again and say it again. I believe that everyone on this call, whether they're presenting to their internal executive leadership team or presenting to another partner or another healthcare's executive leadership team, what I find is everyone's got so many problems that when you're presenting to the CFO, COO, CEO, if you're fortunate, for that 30 minutes or an hour, you have their undivided attention, and that's awesome. The minute you leave that office, they are hit with another 40 or so problems, right? So I think it's very important to be sensitive to that, and also not be sensitive to it And every chance every time you get a chance to make sure that you bring your initiative back up front and center for everybody.
And it's not just bringing it up, it's making sure everybody understands what the end goal is, right? We can talk about the project and we can talk about where we are with the project all day long. But as long as we keep reiterating what we're trying to accomplish and what the results will be, will help maintain that priority and keep it fresh in everybody's mind.
All right, so we're coming to probably the big question of the hour, which is we're going to start with you, Mike. I think, and then we'll go to you, Vishaka and Brian. Thinking about how the role of the CIO has changed over the last figuratively 5 to 7 years with obviously the CTO and now a chief digital information officer, and you might have a CMIO, and you might have a chief clinical officer. Where do you see the CIO's role in 5 years?
I think the CIO's role transitions or transforms into more of a strategy role and potentially even a COO role, even leading into a CEO role, right? As organizations continue to transform digitally and bring in more technology for AI and whatever else the future is going to hold, IT and the CIO, they touch so many aspects of the business that they will understand better than most how the business is operating now, right? Because of so much technology and so much tie-in to that technology that I think they're gonna run the business within 5 years.
Yeah, I think I don't disagree with that. I think that the role of the CIO, CEO, again, there's a convergence happening, that everything is so digitized, especially with obviously the entry of RPA, AI, generative AI. I believe that the CIO is going to be, they're going to read the tea leaves and be able to foreshadow what a dramatic organizational shift is going to look like, because I think AI and generative AI specifically, and I don't want to say it's going to take people's jobs, but I will say it's going to give an organization an opportunity to transform people's jobs, right? And transformation sometimes at the frontline level can be fearful, right? It can be a little bit scary. And so I think you're absolutely right. Before I go to you, Vishaka, let's hear Brian. Brian, any bold predictions and reactions to Mike's comments?
No, I mean, I'm 100% in agreement with Mike, because I recall not even too long ago, we would have a CIO or a senior exec from IT sitting in the room with us with discussions around the oncology program, but it was they're more from a representative standpoint versus kind of helping lead that strategy, where everything's completely changed, right? And that the CIO has a seat at every table, regardless whether it's an IT focused solution, cloud-based solution, or it's new clinical solutions. And for bold predictions, like the proliferation right now of AI it's coming at us 100 miles per hour. Like every day, you're just getting your Becker's update. It's 10 more AI cases and pilot cases and so forth. I mean, I'd be interested, Mike, in that role as also kind of becoming more of a strategist. How do you prioritize what areas to actually look at? Because if you wanted every single day during lunch, you could have a presentation of the next greatest solution that's going to help Genesis Care, your patients, your clinicians. How do you kind of like segment between noise and what priorities are in that role?
Mike, you get that left field question.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, because we're always being pitched, right? And there's always the next shiny object to go focus on. We have to remain steadfast in what we've already determined to be the challenges and opportunities of the business, right? What are we trying to solve right now, rather than go focus on something that hasn't been fully vetted yet? Does that make sense? I want to remain committed to solving today's problems, while at the same time looking forward and being forward thinking to trying to figure out what's coming next. But we still have to solve today's problems.
Vishaka, where do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different factors if I think about it from a strategic leadership standpoint. I think today's CIO focuses on like maintaining existing systems, right? Where I feel like in the future and more innovative CIOs right now already play a proactive role in actually shaping the organization's digital strategy by leveraging these emerging technologies. And I feel as though they're going to have to be more knowledgeable, have a deeper level of understanding about those technologies as well. I think that they're different technologies. When you think about AI, machine learning, what it does when you couple that with like, population health and all of the clinical data sets that are out there, and you think about the genome, it's a very different animal that we're working with in healthcare. And it's very exciting, but at the same time, you have to understand what you're signing up for and what that level of growth looks like for the future. So I think that there's going to be this notion of they're going to have to be very strong or have strong leaders that are in the data governance and analytics so that you have a framework of governance as we think about more of adoption of these emerging technologies. And then I also feel as though that in the future, interoperability is going to have an even greater priority. So these CIOs will need to work towards a seamless data exchange and really leverage this notion of platforms that allow you to actually get the data in, to communicate it out, and then to actually, trigger workflows cross-functionally and being able to understand what those different workflows are. And then I think lastly is really around this notion of regulatory compliance. It's already an essential function of the healthcare CIO, but in the future, regulatory and all the evolving requirements, they will need to stay up to date in terms of the standards and ensuring that their systems, their bodies, their governmental agencies, that they're abiding by the latest set of requirements. Because similar to HIPAA, right? Like when information sharing came about and meaningful use and EHR implementation and adoption, and then boom, there was HIPAA, right? And then now there's so much information out there that, hey, like, let's make sure that information's free for everybody. So now there's the whole notion of can't block information. Oh, and drug prices are skyrocketing. And so now there's the Fair Drug Price Act. Now behind the scenes, what's happening is this whole generation of AI, ML, and if you can only think about the standards that are going to have to be in place in order to propel these organizations to move forward, I really feel like that future CIO is going to have a deeper level of information, understanding, and appreciation for the regulatory ramifications that these healthcare systems are going to have with these emerging technologies as well.
Yeah, so you almost thank you for that. I think what I heard everybody, and I'm in agreement. I think the CIO of before obviously had to have awesome leadership ability, had to have knowledge in a number of different areas across traditional IT, obviously service management, maturity, et cetera. I think you bring up a good point in that AI, generative AI, machine learning, natural language processing concepts and around contextual care planning. I think it's going to drive, and you said it, a deeper level of engagement in order to help guide the organization, right? I think that's both a risk for an organization, also an opportunity, because I think every department head and service line, whether it be somebody from cardiology to pulmonology to nephrology, everyone's going to come beat on the door and say, I want to use this technology, right? They're going to go to a seminar, they're going to go to a convention, and they're going to come back with an idea. I think the CIO going to have to be well-versed across the spectrum to successfully manage those priorities in that response.
I think that just one more thing that I want to add is like, we are always in this conundrum of like EQ and IQ for good leaders, right? I think we will have a lot around the IQ and the ability for us to understand machine learning, data, how it advances the technologies, how it pushes us from an innovation perspective. I think they will have to increase their EQ to understand where are you offsetting the sentiment that's still out there of people not trusting AI, people not trusting and embracing this notion of change, right? And so how can you be at the forefront of pushing emerging technologies when you don't have that understanding of the psyche of people and the labor force who's, you know, in their own domain of having to figure out change management. And now there's this whole beast of AI, and there's some sentiment out there. So I think that they will also have to be more skilled in terms of their emotional quotient as well.
So that really goes directly into really the last question that we have for the audience. And that was really around how do you become that executive sponsor for everything that's kind of bolted around that AI ecosystem, right? And I think while there's not necessarily an explicit answer, I'm interested in, even if it's just a summary again, Vishaka, from yourself and with Brian and with you, Michael, like how are you going to stay ahead and be that executive sponsor in a landscape that's going to change dramatically in the next 12, 18, 24, 36 months?
I can start. So I think that two things. One is CIOs are going to really have to understand the business blockers to actually achieving this notion of, you know, generative AI adoption. So the business blockers, things like cost or data concerns or like the reputational risk, right? The second aspect of it is looking at things like user blockers, which is trust in the machine, understanding poor response quality, right? We're facing that now with the chat GPT, et cetera, that's out there now. Poor response quality, right? It's not always right. And then the misalignment with work, like we're going to have to get through this bumpiness of understanding how we better leverage it. And then I think that, again, going back to this notion of like platforms, right? And ServiceNow, generative AI, and how the future of business is AI powered, being able to understand that it has to be personalized and contextual, understanding that, you know, it has to be more than just language, right? It has to go beyond creating just this notion of responses to a point of actually streamlining business operations and workflows. And then to the third point about the whole notion of trusted AI, it should be governed without any compromise to privacy, ethics, accountability, and or transparency. So I feel as though, you know, being able to look at it from the personalized contextual, more than just machine learning and language, and then looking at it beyond just this notion of trusted AI and actually having a framework of regulatory and compliance around it is going to be the future of really business powered capabilities.
Thank you. Brian, to you first, anything to add with how do you maintain, how do you get to be that executive sponsor around the AI initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vishaka and Mike both mentioned, you know, just some key leadership qualities, right? And that it is going to take strong leaders. And Vishaka, when you're talking about the IQ and the EQ, I see as far as being able to lead AI innovation and be able to kind of maintain that momentum and velocity to seeing it where it's providing the benefit does require those strong EQ skills. With that of, you know, the caregivers, right? That you're basically are having to coach change management to their day in, day out operation. So it has to feel like something that's going to supplement or enhance or solve a problem versus here's a new process that we now are going to change and you have to fit into. You know, it has to be part of that process, but provide the value along the way. So that to be that executive sponsor, it's constant leadership around the goal, right? Like Mike, when asked, how do you keep from getting distracted of every great new thing that can help your patients and physicians? And it's maintaining the focus on that project and continuing to be that internal evangelist along the way within all of the, you know, governance and guidelines that we know are on the horizon that Vishaka was alluding to as well.
Thank you, Brian. Michael, anything to add?
No, I agree with everything Vishaka and Brian said. You know, the communication back to the clinical teams, the frontline teams is vitally important in driving this process forward too, right? Is to alleviate the fear that their job is going to be replaced by AI, is helping them understand why are we doing this? You know, what's the benefit that they're going to see from it? We're not doing this. We're not implementing AI to suddenly have a bunch of robots at the front desk of a healthcare clinic, right? We're trying to supplement the work that they're doing so they can go focus on providing better patient care, right? And eliminating some of the more manual tasks. And I think it just, you know, let's just be open and transparent with the why, and be communicative, and that will bring that team on board. And if you have that team on board, it eliminates a substantial blocker, right? It's the user blocker. It eliminates that, gets their buy-in, and it will make you as the executive sponsor more successful, because now you have now you have the frontline workers engaged and with you.
Yeah, so thank you. And I think before we jump into questions, the last thing that I'll add there, and thank you, Vishaka, for bringing up that concept of I'll call it, you call it blockers, and Michael, blockers. I think probably on the flip side of that is know who your organizational enablers are too, right? Figure out who your best champions are that are with you through the journey, right? Not just the shiny toy. Those are important, but it's important to know who your enablers are in the organization to help you to build that momentum as well. And so that gets us to the last question. I do think we have a couple questions, and if I open this up, I'm gonna start probably besides Vishaka. It looks like you have a request to be a speaker, so I'll let you handle that question. But Eric has a question around as a solution provider and to a healthcare organization. Any thoughts on how I can effectively get my customers, CIO, stakeholder to place importance and resources on his project? I think, and you know, I think Brian, you're probably closest to that as a partner of ours, and see that from a project perspective. You want to chime in there first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think first of all, when I read this on my project, right, that's the problem. It's got to be their project, and they have to see that and prioritize that, as Mike was kind of laying out earlier on how do they determine, how they force rank or prioritize, you know, investments in projects, where it needs to be a project that has, per the last question, an executive or an internal coach that is an executive that sponsors that and has been able to communicate, you know, the change or whatever. If it's ROI first, I think with Vishaka, you talked about hard and soft benefits, right? Like the soft benefits are just as important as the hard, but the hard fits into a spreadsheet. And you have to, so it can't be your project. It needs to be who is the executive that will sponsor this? What problems are you solving along with it? And then how do you get buy-in deeper and wider within the enterprise to be that of a collective team's project to solve problems?
Great. I'm going to jump to the last question on here from Mackenzie, and I'll pitch this one over to you, Vishaka. It says, how do you assess the compatibility and alignment of goals between your organization and potential partners when identifying the right fit for realizing specific business use cases in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, I will. I'll start, and I'd love to get, you know, Brian, Mike, you guys to chime in. I think your partner ecosystem has to be robust enough to where, are they aligned in it for the same benefits as you are? And in all honesty, you know, oftentimes that's the case, but then it comes to price point also, right? And there's been several healthcare organizations I've worked with where there might be a better partner for the job, but, you know, unfortunately, you know, times are tough, negative margins, and therefore they get ruled out very easily. I think the other thing is you have to look at, like, what is the partner in it for? Are they in it to help you scale, to advance your business, to move forward? And are they just a partner that you are paying to get a job done? Or are they a partner that's looking at it from the standpoint of a true strategic partnership that will grow with you through the pains of actually getting the work done and growing into like a long-term strategic partner for you? The most successful organizations that I've worked with have found a partner who is so entrenched into their business that there's no differentiation between this is a partner and this is an employee of the company, right? Because they have the same end goal in mind. And so I think understanding what those tie-ins are very important, but then, with my more tactical leadership hat on, the purse strings are very important as well. But I think you can have the best of both. I think there's plenty of partners out there. Brian, from a partner perspective.
Yeah, it gets back to a question earlier when I was talking about understanding current state and then what is future state, where they want to go to. Is our approach is anytime we have any conversation or engagement with any customer, new or current, is not to just focus on the near term, meaning we need to get XYZ done, right? Or we have a backlog of issues. Yeah, we have solutions for that. But more importantly is getting a better understanding of where they are today and where they want to go. And then us engaging in strategic roadmap workshops. So we're laying out a path to solve the immediate need that may be, kind of the wind behind the sails for the investment right at this given moment. But that shouldn't be the end of the road. Where do we go from there? Where can we expand upon that? How can we get you on a predictive automation path to reduce your costs, to provide more time for your clinicians to have patient-focused time and taking some administrative burden or other like bad process burdens that may be impacting you daily. So it's building that strategic roadmap and understanding that where are we going next, and then the third step along the way versus just kind of having that tunnel vision on the exact thing you need done and then disengage, because at that point we're not a partner, we're just helping solve a problem.
Yeah, I think you're both right. When I look for a partner, I look for a group, someone that's in it for the long term, right? They're invested in my interests, not someone that is just trying to solve a goal. Because a lot of times you go into these conversations, just like Ryan said, right? I may come to you as a partner and say, I'm trying to solve this specific problem. And I think an invested partner and a strategic partner is going to take that statement, that question, and start pushing back. What about this? What about that? Let's think about, okay, we've solved that problem, but what about the next problem? You're going to immediately run into that. But so it partner, it becomes a partnership, right? And a true partner, like Vishaka said, you almost can't tell that, you can't tell where the line is, right? Because we're working very seamlessly and closely together. And the due diligence prior to any engagement, like Brian mentioned, road mapping and the strategic conversations before we even get to statement of work phases is critically important.
Yeah, I think to wrap, I know we have about 30 more seconds. I think sometimes a good old fashioned, the management consultant and me, a good old 2x2 that highlights the different points from capabilities through what you want as an organization from an alignment will do a lot of good to objectively be able to see which partners come out ahead. And hopefully most of the time that aligns with what your gut feeling is as well. So we're coming up here on the top of the hour. I do want to thank our panelists, Vishaka, Brian, and Michael, and the entire audience for joining today. We hope that it was beneficial to you, and thank you again very much.
Thank you to ServiceNow and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website at hlth.com to catch up on all Health Go Live webinars. And join us in Las Vegas, October 8th through 11th for Health 2023.